Moving to your next slide, then, you see we're going to talk about a third final concept that is key to why English colonization can get off the ground. You've got the naval power and naval transportation in place. You've got the population that has got nothing to lose by going and has a lot to not gain by staying. They've got no economic opportunities. Third and final element here is the formation or the creation of a business concept called the joint stock company, which is not unlike in many ways what you see today on Wall Street and the stock market. The notion of stock is a pooling of capital, which is money available for investment purposes. It takes an awful lot of money to run a business, like a Microsoft or a General Electric or a General Motors, more money than any one person has. So what you do is, as a venture capitalist, you solicit, you ask people for their money. In exchange for that money, you give them a piece of paper. And on that paper it says you own X percentage of shares of stock or ownership of our company because of what you paid in. And the goal then of my being the company owner is to turn a profit, and some of that profit then goes back to you, the stockholder, in what is called a dividend. This is Basic Business 101. You probably know it today. Same concept applies to what was happening with the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company was chartered, had to receive its incorporation charter from the king, which allowed it to be a for-profit venture heading to the New World for profit. So those 3 G's, gold, glory, God, specifically the G of gold is why they're coming to Virginia. And they've got to turn a profit to satisfy their investors and make them happy and have this reason to exist. So Jamestown, 1607, the first English settlement in North America. And Jamestown winds up being a train wreck from the beginning, an utter disaster from the beginning. The Roanoke colony we'd seen under Walter Raleigh, far smaller colony, failed outright. When they returned the next year, everybody was gone. They didn't know where they were. Jamestown gets quite close to that. The first 400 people to go, only 60 of them lived through the first winter. And this was known as the so-called starving time. And much of this was very much like the old child's fable, the grasshopper and the ant. When they arrived in the New World, all of these losers, these second-borns, if you will, the economic losers of England who were coming over, those who'd been thrown off the land, those who had no legal inheritance, no claim to any, they were seeking to come here, and they thought they were going to do what the Spanish did. They were going to strike it rich. They were going to strike it rich quick. They were going to use the New World as an ATM machine, generate wealth, and get what they wanted, and then maybe go back to England. They did not see this godforsaken place as anywhere that they wanted to stay. As such, this creates a really destabilized, very poor social situation for cohesion. You've got a society that isn't a society. You've got a bunch of individuals, single young white males, coming over who don't know each other, aren't associated, and they come over and they're in it for themselves. It's not it doesn't build a sense of community. And they spend those first years looking for gold everywhere instead of actually setting up a community and starting to clear land to farm, which is why they all starved in the winter, because they hadn't grown anything. Finally, enter one soldier of fortune by the name of John Smith, sort of adventurer, soldier of fortune at large, who is in this Virginia colony and sees what's happening around him and essentially assumes leadership of the colony, and through a brutal, almost dictatorial military boot camp type discipline, gets the colony to organize and survive. And his most famous quote is, "If you do not work, you will not eat." And he compels through force, not just presence of personality, but through force, compels the colony to do the things it needs to do to begin to survive with very harsh discipline. And they gradually start to get off the ground, at least in terms of not turning a profit yet, but being able to not all die. And the next year, more colonists come to replenish for the 60 that are left and add more to that total. And they start to gradually build the basis for an outpost, for an establishment. What turns the corner for Jamestown will be John Rolfe and the cultivation of tobacco. Tobacco, the so-called golden weed of the New World, as a consumer luxury item, becomes all the rage in Europe. Even though the King of England tested it, the rest of Europe, England, everyone, they're all for it. This becomes the cash cow. They find gold in a different way. They don't find gold under the ground. They find gold that grows on it. The golden weed of tobacco winds up making the Virginia colony a profitable enterprise after all. And so they gradually start to generate some economic development to go along with this modest settlement they're setting up. Their problem, like the Spanish then, is going to be labor. How are they going to clear the land, to work the fields? Tobacco is a very labor-intensive crop to grow and to cure and to harvest and then to pack and to ship back. And so they solve their labor problems not just through the landless second-borns, the primogeniture victims who are coming over, those from the enclosure. they began using a labor contract model called indentures, or indentured servitude, which is a very important AP history term. What this is, it's a contract. It's a working contract agreement. An individual who is landless, without the funds to get to the New World, this New World, which is a labor-starved region, there's people here that need labor. There's people back off the map in England, the Old World, who don't have money to get here, but they could provide the labor. And it's a reciprocal deal. What the deal is that a landowner here will pay the passage, pay for someone to come over to the New World, and when they get here, put them up. Maybe teach them a trade, give them food, shelter, clothing, all that kind of stuff. And for a 4 to 7 year period, that indentured servant would work for this person, working off the indenture, working off the contract. At the end of that 4 to 7 year cycle, they are then a free man, free person here in the New World, if they live through that 4 to 7 year time. As you can tell, there's a lot of people, there's a big die-off even on the Colonials. If you see Jamestown, 400 went the first year, 60 lived. Those figures will be kind of proportional for the next couple of years, but for people in the Old World that had nothing to lose, it was a risk worth taking. It's an economic risk that definitely seemed worth it. So in Virginia, you then begin to see the formations of an economic viable base, a political order that's at least going to have ground rules that individuals can sort of follow and almost set up a society by. And in 1619, the Virginia House of Burgesses becomes the first representative assembly here in the New World. The Virginia Charter allowed them to establish some sort of representative local governance to deal with the issues that needed to be dealt with. Protection from Indians, land clearance, solving title disputes, solving problems they simply couldn't, write back to England and then wait, 8 to 14 weeks to get a response on what to do. They had to make decisions here. And the House of Burgesses, as that first step towards representative government, starts to make that take place. The colony, though, fell into mismanagement on many occasions and ultimately fell back to royal control in 1624. The charter is revoked by the king and it becomes a crown colony at that point. And when I talk about this notion of immigration as a conveyor belt, those 400 coming and 60 living, that proportion played out for a long time. By 1625, some 20 years after Jamestown's establishment, of the 8,000 people total that had been sent to Jamestown, only 1,200 survived. So it's a very valid analogy to consider immigration from the Old World to the New World. It's a very valid analogy. It'd be great to use in some of your papers as well, the metaphor of the conveyor belt. We're continuously dropping off this supply of people here who are dying almost as fast as that surplus population is coming from the Old World to here. We're trying to stay ahead of it. If we can shovel or throw enough people in the New World, maybe enough will live to keep this exercise going, to keep this as a viable concern. And we won't simply have the die-off of nobody left to actually perform and do anything, because the mortality rates were fantastic. Notice it was not just for the Native Americans. We've talked about that already as a big die-off rate, but you're talking about a pretty significant die-off rate for the first colonists coming, and this is going to be a 30, 40, 50, 60 year kind of thing until this finally stabilizes. So that is the impact that we see in Virginia. The second colony that is set up is up north, the New England colonies. We'll start with Plymouth and Separatism. And so we need to discuss some terms for a moment. Puritans and Pilgrims, Separatists and non-Separatists. When Henry VIII establishes the Anglican Church, the Church of England, not all Englishmen are happy about this. And you've got a few different views on this. Discounting the group of English Catholics who remained loyal to Catholicism in the English Civil War, among the Protestants, among those who did not like the Catholic Church, some of them have problems with the Anglican Church. Some argue that Henry's Anglican Church is still too Catholic and it ought to be purified. They need to keep most of the Anglican Church but still discard some elements. There are other true believers in Protestantism, in reforming religion, that believe that even Henry's church is just too broken and corrupt. We need to throw it out. And they were the separatists. They wanted to separate, and separatism, separation, wanted to separate and establish their own religion. The first people coming to the New World for this New England colony were actually not supposed to go to New England. Under license of the Virginia Company, a group of pilgrims, these separatists, these separatist pilgrims who wanted to break away even from the Church of England, received permission permission from the Virginia Company charter to establish, part of their colonial settlings in Virginia. They deliberately settled further away from Virginia than they had to. They didn't realize they were going to go as far north as they did, but they deliberately settled further away from Virginia because they wanted to set up their own colony where they could be not under the oversight of the Virginia Company, but also not under the oversight of Anglicanism. They wanted to set up their own colony as a small, devout group of true believers who were going to live the godly life as they saw it. On the Mayflower, they initially established the Mayflower Compact just as they're getting off of the ship. What this is, another building block in many ways of American democracy, it was a general set of rules that everybody on the ship agreed to obey, that they were going to kind of follow the majority rule. It wasn't really a constitution per se, but it was going to set the standard for what later constitutions would be. So notice how both of these two regions have made modest contributions to things that will get much bigger later on. We're establishing the seeds of things that we'll talk about in linkage, tying events together in future lessons. You have representative government in Virginia through the House of Burgesses being modestly started in its own way. You've got the Mayflower Compact, this notion of a written document ensuring for preservation of majority rights and rule with the majority in mind being settled by the by the Pilgrims. Now, William Bradford is their leader. They do have that first Thanksgiving in 1621. And from the beginning, the Puritan colony is going to be a bit more successful than the Jamestown colony in terms of survival. I'll get into some reasons why when we get down to our next slide and talk about the group that is going to come and overwhelm the Pilgrims big time.